Princess Calira sat upon the shining throne of glass and light, her silver eyes fixed on the empty space in front of her as nobles whispered among themselves, wondering what thoughts hid behind her calm face, for she had never spoken a word. To them, not in a voice, not in a language they could understand. Her people, the Zelari, communicated through pulses of energy and emotion, but Calira was different, more silent than the stars themselves. The imperial court was beautiful, but cold, filled with advisors who feared her quiet presence and scholars who studied her, but failed to reach her. She alone could activate the ancient device buried deep beneath the palace, a relic of a time no one remembered, an object that hummed only when she walked near it, glowing faintly in colors no one could name. Her father, Emperor Vale, grew, tired of failed attempts to make contact with her inner world, and in a final act of hope, he allowed humans to visit the Empire, something no ruler had dared before. Among the group of visitors was Commander Rian Holt, a human soldier with a past shaped by war and a heart shaped by loss. He was not like the others who bowed too low or spoke too much. When Calira entered the great hall to greet the human delegation, it was Rian who stood silently, watching her not with fear or admiration, but with curiosity and quiet understanding. As the others spoke and translators buzzed with confusion, Rian noticed Calira's fingers tapping softly against the edge of her seat, not randomly, but in a rhythm: 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps, a pause, 1 slow tap. It repeated. Something about it made Rian sit up. He tapped back lightly on the table in front of him, mimicking her pattern. Calira's eyes widened just a bit, and for the first time in years she tilted her head slightly, as if asking a question. Rian responded with another rhythm, something playful but steady, and the room fell into an uneasy hush as the two continued their silent exchange. Whispers rose. Who was this human? Why was the silent princess reacting to him? The emperor noticed, too, but said nothing. That night the palace buzzed with rumors, yet Calira stayed silent. Alone in her chamber, she stared out at the stars, her hand resting on the cold glass. She tapped once, twice, 3 times. Down below, in a guest chamber far from hers, Rian sat awake, remembering the beat. He didn't know why, but it stayed in his mind like a song waiting to be heard again. The next morning, when they met in the observatory, Calira brought him to the artifact room. No one had been allowed there except scientists and royal guards. The device, shaped like a twisted ring of crystal and metal, pulsed weakly when Calira touched it. Rian stepped closer. The lights flickered brighter. Calira looked at him, not with command, but with trust. She lifted his hand and placed it near the core. The artifact came to life with a low hum, lights swirling in gentle patterns. It had never done that before. A scientist gasped. One of the advisors ran to alert the emperor, but Calira didn't let go of Rian's hand. In that moment something passed between them, not words, not energy, but connection. For the first time she felt seen, and Rian, who had seen too much pain and death in his life, felt something he couldn't name. Calira smiled, just barely. The artifact continued to hum, and the ancient lines on its surface began to shift, forming symbols lost to time. Outside the chamber, footsteps echoed. Trouble was coming. But for now, something had begun. Something no one else could explain. The warrior who had come to protect had become the key, and the princess who had never spoken had finally been understood. The news of the artifact's sudden awakening spread like wildfire through the palace, and though no one said it aloud, every advisor knew it had something to do with the human warrior and the silent princess, who now stood at the center of a mystery no one could unravel. For Calira had never reacted this way to anyone, not to her people, not to any diplomat, not even to her father, but Rian Holt, the quiet soldier from Earth, had done something no translator or scholar could, and it wasn't magic or science, it was rhythm, trust, and a strange unspoken understanding that felt ancient and new at the same time. After the artifact glowed, the Emperor ordered a private meeting between Rian and Calira in the upper gardens, away from watching eyes and hidden devices, and though the guards frowned and the advisors protested, the Emperor insisted, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this human could help his daughter unlock what she carried within. In the garden, surrounded by floating lanterns and singing crystals, Calira sat on a bench and tapped a pattern on the stone seat, and Rian, without a word, sat beside her and replied with a similar beat, and then another, and soon the two were tapping rhythms into the air, into the stone, into each other's memory, and though they spoke no words, something between them deepened, something that felt like language even though no sound passed their lips. The next day, Rian began learning more complex patterns, and Calira began using gestures with the beats, slight movements of her hands, small tilts of her head, and Rian, ever observant, followed and learned quickly, until he could understand. Simple ideas, feelings, warnings, even jokes, and that's when the scientists grew more curious, and the council grew more afraid, for the bond between the two was growing too fast, too strong, and it made them uncomfortable, as though they were being left behind. One night, as Rian studied the translated patterns in his guest quarters, a soft knock came at his door, and when he opened it, a servant slipped him a sealed note with no name, just 4 words. She is not safe. His heart tightened. He knew Calira was kept under watch, but he hadn't imagined she was in real danger. Without hesitation, he made his way through the shadowed halls, past drowsy guards, and found her chamber doors sealed. He tapped their shared pattern softly on the wall. For a moment, silence. Then, from inside, the pattern returned, slow, weak, frightened. She was awake. She was alone. Something was wrong. He pressed his hand to the door, whispering that he would get her out, though he knew she couldn't hear the words. Behind him, footsteps approached fast. 2 guards appeared, their faces hard, their orders clear. He was no longer allowed near the princess. Rian did not fight, but in his eyes burned the fire of a man who would not forget. The next morning, a public announcement was made. Calira had fallen ill and would remain isolated until further notice. But Rian knew the truth. Someone wanted her silent again, and as he stood in the garden alone, remembering the rhythm she had used to say danger and watch, he realized that the connection they shared wasn't just rare, it was a threat to those in power. He had to act carefully. That night, with the help of one of the human engineers, he hacked into the artifact's monitoring system. What he found shocked him. The device had recorded energy pulses stronger than anything seen in 1,000 years, all triggered by the presence of both Calira and Rian together, and it showed that when they touched, the frequencies aligned perfectly, creating a balance unknown to Zilari science. This wasn't random. It was designed. They were meant to connect. The next day, Rian requested to visit the artifact again. The Emperor allowed it, but placed him under constant watch. When Rian approached the device, he placed his hand on it and began tapping the rhythm Kalira had used before the shutdown. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, the device began to glow. Again, faint. But steady. The scientist watched, confused. Why was the artifact responding to a human? The Emperor ordered an investigation. The council demanded Rian return to Earth, but just before they could remove him, a message appeared on the artifacts. Display shifting symbols forming an image of two figures, one Zilari, one human, standing side by side beneath a circle of stars. It was a message from the past, a memory left behind. The connection was real, old, and powerful. And now, everyone knew it. That night, Rian was placed under guarded quarters, but as he stared out the window at the stars, he tapped the rhythm once more on the glass. Somewhere in the palace, Kalira did the same. Their connection still held strong, and neither of them would stop until the truth was uncovered. The palace stood quiet under a purple sky, but deep inside its ancient walls, things were beginning to stir, for the artifact had shown a vision that no one could explain. Two figures, one human and one Zilari, standing beneath a glowing star map. And though the scientists tried to analyze the image, they could not read the symbols or understand the meaning behind the light. Yet Kalira and Rian both knew it was a message, a memory left by those who had come before, hidden for a reason, waiting for someone to find it. Kalira, still confined to her quarters, spent her time tapping out patterns in the dark, working through every rhythm and gesture they had shared, trying to find what the artifact had awakened in her, because for the first time in her life, she felt something alive inside her voice, not just in the rhythms, but deep in her throat, in the vibrations that wanted to rise. She had always been told to stay silent, that her sound could hurt others, that her voice was unstable, but with Rian, it had been different. He had listened, not with ears alone, but with heart and attention, and that made all the difference. Meanwhile, Rian, still under light guard, had not stopped studying the device. Using scraps of data and old texts found in the palace archives, he noticed something hidden in the pulse waves left behind by the artifact bursts of sound shaped like songs, incomplete and broken, like someone had started singing but never finished. He recorded them, played them back, and one night, as he tapped the sounds quietly on the table, a soft breeze blew through the chamber, though the windows were sealed. He looked up. The artifact had reacted from across the palace. It pulsed once. He realized then the sound, the code, was connected to Kalira's voice. He had to reach her. Risking punishment, Rian made his way to her wing, using hidden paths the servants had whispered about, and when he reached her door, he tapped once softly, then twice, then 3 times in a heartbeat pattern. A pause. Then came a reply, slower, hesitant. She was weak but awake. He whispered her name, even though she could not hear it, and then he told her everything he had learned, the incomplete song, the symbols, the sound. Inside, Kalira touched her throat and remembered the old lessons, how they warned her that her voice could shatter things if used wrong, how they feared her ability, and how she had been taught to stay silent for safety. But now, with Rian so close, something inside her changed. She stood and placed her hand on the wall, sending a single vibration through it, one that hummed like a soft breath. Rian felt it through his skin. Then, for the first time since he arrived, he heard her speak, not a word, but a note, quiet and high, like the whisper of wind over glass. The wall between them glowed faintly. He stepped back. The guards arrived seconds later, dragged him away, and locked him under high surveillance. But Kalira was no longer silent. In her chamber she began humming in soft patterns, and the artifact responded every time, glowing brighter, showing clearer images, visions of ancient ships, of Zelari and human working together, of a forgotten alliance that had shaped the stars. The council grew nervous. One advisor urged the emperor to shut down the artifact and isolate Kalira permanently, but the emperor hesitated, torn between fear and wonder. The next day, Kalira requested an audience in the main hall, and though the council resisted, the emperor allowed it. She arrived dressed in silver robes, her face calm, and beside her stood two scientists who had witnessed her power. In front of the council, she sang one note clear, steady, pure. The artifact in the center of the room responded at once. A glowing map formed above it, showing planets and stars, each marked with signs only Kalira could read. Then one of the advisors shouted, claiming it was a trick, and moved to shut it down. Rian, recently freed by the emperor's order, stepped forward, saying only, "Let her finish." Kalira looked at him and sang again, this time in a rhythm they had shared since the beginning. The map shifted. A hidden chamber opened beneath the hall, revealing an ancient tablet covered in symbols from both their worlds. It was a key, and the code was hidden in her voice, in the patterns Rian had helped her uncover. The court stood silent. No one could deny what they had seen. The emperor rose slowly and spoke, his voice shaking. The past has chosen its speakers, and Kalira, once feared and ignored, had become the voice of that past. The code, the map, the light, it had all waited for her. But she never would have unlocked it alone. Only with him. Only together. The palace was no longer quiet, for the sound of Kalira's voice still echoed through the grand hall. And though it had been soft, it had changed everything. The artifact was awake. The map was revealed, and the old secrets had returned to the surface like light rising from the depths of space. But not everyone welcomed this change, and in the shadows of power, fear began to grow, because the council knew that if Kalira and the human warrior Rian Holt continued their bond, the ancient order would shift and their control would slip. So they met in secret and agreed that the two must be separated before the people began to follow them, before the past they had uncovered became the future they could not control. That night, Kalira stood alone in the crystal chamber, her fingers tracing the glowing lines of the star map while her heart beat in rhythm with memories she could not explain, memories that felt older than her life, and she thought of Rian. How he had listened without needing sound, how he had seen her not as a symbol or a threat, but simply as a person, and how his presence had made her feel whole for the first time. And as she hummed their shared pattern beneath her breath, the artifact pulsed once again, like a heartbeat answering hers. Far away, in the northern wing, Rian paced his quarters, feeling the same pull in his chest, an invisible thread that connected them across walls and silence, But his door was guarded now, and he knew something was wrong when the usual reports and greetings from the palace staff stopped coming, when the glances from others turned colder, more distant, and when the chrome device he used to study the artifact's responses suddenly went dark. The next morning he was summoned for a diplomatic errand, told that it was urgent and required his presence off-world, but he refused, demanding to see Kalira before leaving, and when they denied him, he knew the truth. They were trying to send him away to break the connection. He had no proof, only instinct, but it was enough. That night he escaped the guarded quarters using a hidden servant tunnel he had memorized weeks before, and he moved like a shadow through the palace halls until he reached the observatory where he and Kalira had first started their rhythm. She was already there, standing in the glow of the artifact, her hands trembling and her eyes filled with a quiet fire. Without a word, she stepped forward and reached for his hand. The moment they touched, the entire chamber lit up. The map above them brightened, stars spinning slowly, and in the center appeared a shape, a symbol of unity, of two hearts beating as one, a shape seen in no Zilari text, but remembered by Kalira from her earliest dreams. The artifact began to sing, a low hum filled with layers, like voices across time, and then the floor beneath them shifted, revealing a staircase that led down into the deepest part of the palace. They descended together, heartbeat and rhythm, in sync until they reached a sealed chamber that no one had opened for thousands of years. Kalira sang the pattern she had used with Rian, and the door slid open. Inside was a room made of memory stone, walls that shimmered with history. Images flickered Zilari and humans building worlds together, creating the map, singing the stars into balance. It had all happened before, long ago, and it was meant to happen again. They were not the first pair, but perhaps they were the last hope. As they stood in the center of the chamber, the Emperor and the Council arrived, guards with weapons drawn, and the Emperor, though torn by doubt, demanded to know what they were doing. Rian stepped forward, not with aggression but calm, and said only, "Let her speak." Kalira turned, her voice steady, and for the second time she spoke aloud in their language. "You fear what you do not understand, but the stars remember us." Her voice caused the artifact to rise into the air, glowing brighter than before. The chamber shook, not with destruction, but with life. The Emperor dropped his weapon and stepped back, watching as his daughter, once silent, now stood with strength. Her voice unlocking more than technology, it unlocked truth. The council members, faces pale, could say nothing. No threat, no order, could stop what had already begun. Kalira and Rian looked at each other, not needing words. They had built trust without sound, formed connection without force, and now the stars responded to their harmony. The heart that had once spoken only in silence now sang in light, and the galaxy listened.